In the autumn of 2017, the Vance triplets, Alara, Lyra, and Kasia, were a study in harmonious difference. At 26 years old, they shared an identical genetic blueprint that manifested in strikingly similar appearances. Sharp, intelligent eyes the color of slate, a spray of freckles across the bridge of their noses, and athletic frames honed by years of shared outdoor pursuits. Yet, their professions and personalities diverged in ways that made their collective presence all the more compelling. Alara, the eldest by a mere 7 minutes, was a geologist, a woman grounded in the tangible history of the earth, her mind a library of strata and stone. Lyra, the second-born, was a botanist, her focus on the vibrant, living tapestry that covered the earth's bones. Kasia, the youngest, was a primary school teacher, her world one of human potential and the nurturing of young minds. Their lives, though separate in daily routine, were woven together by an unbreakable familial bond and a profound, mutual love for the untamed wilderness. This love was not a casual hobby but a disciplined passion, cultivated since childhood under the guidance of their father, a retired park ranger who had instilled in them a deep respect for nature's beauty and its unforgiving power. They were not novices. They were seasoned, knowledgeable, and meticulously prepared individuals. Their planned excursion for the second week of October was to be a 5-day trek through a remote and challenging section of the Shenandoah National Forest, culminating in an ascent of the formidable Griffin's Peak. The route was one they had researched for months, cross-referencing topographical maps with satellite imagery and recent trail reports. Their plan, detailed in a laminated itinerary left on their mother's kitchen counter, was a testament to their experience. It outlined their daily mileage goals, designated campsites near reliable water sources, and contingency routes in case of inclement weather. Communication protocols were also clearly defined. They carried a satellite messenger, pre-programmed with check-in messages to be sent each evening at approximately 1900 hours, and an emergency beacon for dire situations. Their mother, Eleanor Vance, a pragmatic woman who had long grown accustomed to her daughter's adventurous spirit, felt the familiar, low-level hum of anxiety, but took comfort in their thoroughness. The plan was sound, the equipment was top of the line, and the triplets were, as always, a self-sufficient and formidable unit. On the morning of Tuesday, October 10th, they made their departure. The last confirmed, independent sighting of the Vance sisters was at a small, family-owned gear shop on the outskirts of the town of Pine Ridge, the gateway to the national forest. The owner, a man named Alistair Finch, later reported to investigators that the three women had come in around 0830 hours to purchase a canister of isobutane fuel and a few freeze-dried meals. He recalled their demeanor as relaxed, cheerful, and focused. They spoke with him for a few minutes about the trail conditions, specifically asking about a recent rockslide reported on a secondary path they had marked as a potential alternate. He confirmed that the main trail to Griffin's Peak was clear. At 0915 hours, Kasia sent a final text message to their mother. It was a photograph of the three of them standing in front of the trailhead sign, their faces bright with anticipation under the crisp autumn sky. The accompanying text read, "All set to go. The weather is perfect. Sending the first satellite check-in tonight. Love you." Eleanor replied with her customary, "Be safe. Love you more," a message that would later be recorded in the case file as the last known communication they received. Their vehicle, a dark green sport utility vehicle, was logged by the park's entrance station at 0932 hours. It was later found parked neatly in its designated spot at the Griffin's Peak trailhead, locked and undisturbed. The sisters had vanished into the vast, silent wilderness, leaving behind nothing but a well-laid plan and the echo of a cheerful goodbye. The first sign of trouble was subtle, a quiet deviation from the meticulous plan the Vance sisters had established. On Tuesday evening, 1900 hours came and went without the expected ping from their satellite messenger. Eleanor Vance, checking her phone in her quiet suburban home, felt a flicker of unease but rationalized it away. Perhaps they were delayed setting up camp. Perhaps the dense canopy of the Oakhaven forest was interfering with the signal. She had faith in their competence and went to bed telling herself the message would arrive overnight. By Wednesday evening, when the second scheduled check-in was also missed, the flicker of unease had kindled into a persistent, gnawing dread. This was not like them. Two missed check-ins were not a simple technical glitch. It was a breach of their own rigid protocol, a protocol designed specifically to prevent this very type of parental anxiety. She called their satellite messenger provider, who confirmed that no signals, either check-ins or emergency alerts, had been received from their device since it was activated prior to the trip. The silence was absolute. By Friday morning, 48 hours after the second missed communication, Eleanor's carefully constructed composure had crumbled. Her daughters were scheduled to be emerging from the trail on Saturday afternoon, but her maternal instinct screamed that something was profoundly wrong. She drove the 2 hours to the Oak Haven County Sheriff's Office, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. There, she filed a missing persons report with a deputy who listened patiently, his expression a practiced blend of concern and procedural calm. The report was officially logged at 1,047 hours on Friday, October 13th. The case was assigned to Sheriff Brody Evans, a 30-year veteran of the department with extensive experience in wilderness search and rescue operations. Evans, a stoic and methodical man, understood the critical importance of the early hours in such cases. He immediately treated the situation not as a case of overdue hikers, but as a potential critical incident. The fact that the Vance sisters were highly experienced and had missed 2 check-ins from a functioning satellite device was a significant red flag. It suggested that whatever had happened, it had likely been sudden and had prevented all 3 of them from activating an emergency signal. The first concrete step in the investigation was to locate their vehicle. A patrol unit was dispatched to the Griffin's Peak trailhead, a remote parking area carved out of the dense forest. At 1,320 hours, the deputy confirmed the presence of the dark green SUV. The vehicle was locked, and a cursory look through the windows revealed a scene that was both reassuring and deeply unsettling. Inside, everything appeared normal. 3 day packs, intended for their post-hike return to civilization, sat on the back seat. Alongside them were changes of clean clothes. In the center console, investigators would later find Cash's wallet containing her driver's license and credit cards, along with Lyra's smartphone. Alara's purse was on the passenger floor. The presence of these personal items strongly indicated that the sisters had fully intended to return to their vehicle. They had not run away. They had embarked on their planned trek and expected to complete it. The undisturbed state of the car offered no signs of a struggle or foul play at the trailhead. It was as if they had simply parked, shouldered their multi-day packs, and been swallowed whole by the forest. The silent, locked vehicle became the first physical anchor in a mystery that was rapidly expanding into the vast, unmappable terrain of the unknown. With the vehicle confirmed and the sisters' failure to return now an official, high-priority case, Sheriff Evans initiated a full-scale search and rescue mobilization on the morning of Saturday, October 14th. The operation was headquartered at a temporary command post set up in the trailhead parking lot, a hub of controlled chaos against the serene backdrop of the autumn woods. Resources were marshaled from across the state. The Oak Haven County Sheriff's Office provided the core ground teams and investigative oversight. They were soon joined by specialized units from the state forest rangers, whose intimate knowledge of the park's treacherous topography was invaluable. Volunteer search and rescue organizations, comprised of highly trained mountaineers and emergency medical technicians, arrived in convoys, bringing with them a surge of manpower and specialized equipment. A state police helicopter was assigned to the operation, its rotors beating a rhythmic pulse of urgency over the forest canopy. Most critically, several K-9 units were deployed, including scent-specific dogs given articles of the sisters' clothing provided by their mother. The initial search area was defined by the detailed itinerary the triplets had left behind, a 5-day loop covering approximately 40 miles of rugged terrain. The search process began with a systematic and methodical grid-based approach. The planned route was the primary axis, with teams assigned to sweep overlapping sectors on either side of the trail. The helicopter performed low-altitude passes, its crew scanning for any sign of brightly colored clothing, shelters, or smoke. However, the conditions on the ground presented immense challenges. The Oak Haven National Forest in mid-October was a dense tapestry of golds, reds, and browns. The thick canopy of deciduous trees, while beautiful, severely limited aerial visibility, and the forest floor was blanketed in a thick carpet of freshly fallen leaves that could easily conceal a person or discarded gear. The terrain itself was an adversary. The trail frequently traversed steep, rocky inclines, crossed deep ravines, and wound through boulder fields that made footing precarious. Sheriff Evans, coordinating the effort from the command post, knew that the vastness of the wilderness was working against them. A person could be mere yards from the trail and remain completely invisible to searchers. Each team was equipped with GPS trackers, their movements plotted in real time on a large digital map at the command post, ensuring no area was left unsearched, but the sheer scale of the task was daunting. The forest seemed to hold its secrets tightly, resisting every effort to reveal what had happened to the Vance sisters. By the end of the first week, the massive search operation had yielded a collection of clues that were as puzzling as they were minimal. The most promising lead came from AK-9 unit on the second day. A bloodhound, given Lyra Vance's scent from a sweater, tracked a clear path from the trailhead for approximately 3 miles along the designated route. Then, at a point where the dirt trail gave way to a large, flat expanse of granite slab, the trail went cold. The dog became agitated, casting about in wide circles, but could not reacquire the scent. It was as if the sisters had simply vanished into thin air from the surface of the rock. Ground teams scoured the area for hours, examining every crack and crevice, but found nothing. 2 days later, a volunteer searcher found a single, black hiking glove, later identified by Eleanor as belonging to Kasia, resting on a moss-covered log approximately half a mile off the main trail, in a direction they had not planned to go. The glove was clean, dry, and appeared to have been placed deliberately, not dropped accidentally during a fall. There were no scuff marks, no signs of a struggle nearby. It was just there, a silent, solitary object in the vast woods. The final and most baffling discovery was their designated campsite for the first night. A team found the spot, identifiable by a small, expertly built fire ring, exactly where the itinerary said it would be. The fire was cold, with ashes suggesting it had been used for a single evening meal and then properly extinguished. But the site was otherwise empty. There was no tent, no sleeping bags, no cooking equipment. It looked as if they had packed up all their gear in the morning and continued their hike as planned, yet no one had seen or heard from them since. These fragments of evidence painted a contradictory and deeply disturbing picture, leaving Sheriff Evans and his team with more questions than answers. The search was extensive and exhaustive, but the forest remained silent. After 14 days of intensive, round-the-clock operations, the official search for the Vance sisters was formally scaled back. The decision, announced by a grim-faced Sheriff Evans at a press conference on October 28, was a logistical and emotional necessity, but it felt like a profound defeat. The active search had involved over 300 personnel, dozens of K-9 units, and hundreds of hours of air support, covering more than 250 square miles of unforgiving wilderness. Every plausible area along their planned route and its surrounding terrain had been swept multiple times. No new evidence had emerged since the discovery of the single glove and the abandoned first-night campsite. With resources exhausted and no new leads to pursue, the operation transitioned from an active search to a reactive one. The case file would remain open, and any new information would be investigated, but the daily onslaught of ground pounders and helicopters would cease. For the teams involved, it was a frustrating conclusion, a shared sense of having looked directly at a mystery without being able to see its solution. For Eleanor Vance, the announcement was a devastating blow, the official closing of a door she was determined to keep wedged open. As the official search wound down, the rhythm of the seasons began to mark the passage of time. The vibrant autumn leaves that had hampered the search fell from the trees, leaving a stark, skeletal forest under a gray November sky. Winter arrived, draping the Oakhaven National Forest in a thick blanket of snow, sealing the landscape and any potential secrets it held under feet of impenetrable white. The case of the missing Vance triplets, once a headline story, slowly faded from the news cycle, replaced by other, more immediate tragedies. But for Eleanor Vance, time did not heal. It only deepened the wound of their absence. She refused to let their memory fade. With the inheritance left by her late husband, she funded a series of private searches, hiring specialized teams with cave-penetrating radar and forensic anthropologists to re-examine the areas the official search had covered. She maintained a social media page, Find the Vance Sisters, posting their pictures, details of the case, and pleas for any information. Her posts a heart-wrenching chronicle of a mother's unwavering hope against mounting despair. She became a familiar face at the sheriff's office, meeting with Brody Evans every few weeks, bringing him coffee and any new, often flimsy, lead she had gleaned from online forums or psychic tipsters. Evans, for his part, never treated her with anything less than profound respect, patiently listening and dutifully following up on even the most improbable suggestions. The case file on his desk remained perpetually open, a constant, silent reproach. Months bled into a year, then two. The snows of winter melted into the green flush of spring, which ripened into the heat of summer, then cooled again into the melancholy of autumn. The forest cycled through its seasons, a relentless, indifferent metronome counting the days of their absence. With the official investigation stalled and the passage of time creating a vacuum of information, public perception and speculation began to shift in directions that were both painful for the family and distracting for law enforcement. In the absence of facts, theories flourished in the fertile ground of online forums and true crime communities. One prevalent theory, which gained considerable traction, was that the sisters had orchestrated their own disappearance. Proponents of this idea pointed to their expertise and the lack of any evidence of foul play as proof. They suggested the triplets, tired of their conventional lives, had used their wilderness skills to vanish and start anew somewhere off the grid. This narrative, while offering a non-violent explanation, was a cruel torment to their mother, painting her meticulous, loving daughters as deceptive and callous. An even more damaging and specific theory emerged, focusing on Kasia, the schoolteacher. Anonymous online posts began to speculate about an inappropriate relationship between her and a former colleague. This baseless rumor mutated into a full-blown narrative that the hiking trip was a cover for Kasia to run away with this man, and her sisters, in an act of misguided loyalty, had gone with her. The theory was entirely fabricated, but it cast a shadow of scandal over Kasia's memory and forced the family to issue public denials, adding a layer of public relations defense to their private grief. Sheriff Evans's department spent valuable time investigating and debunking these claims, pulling resources away from the core mystery. The official focus of the investigation, lacking any new physical evidence from the forest, had little choice but to drift towards the sisters' personal lives, searching for any hint of motive for a voluntary disappearance. Bank accounts were scrutinized, phone records reanalyzed, and friends re-interviewed. The result was always the same. 3 happy, well-adjusted women with strong community ties, stable finances, and no discernible reason to abandon their lives. The case had gone cold, frozen not just by the winter snows, but by a complete and total lack of actionable leads. 3 years after the Vance sisters vanished, in the late summer of 2020, the case broke wide open with a discovery made by the most unlikely of individuals. Dr. Eris Thorne, a postdoctoral researcher in lichenology from a state university, was in the Oak Haven National Forest conducting fieldwork for a study on rare, high-altitude moss and lichen species. His research required him to venture far from any established trails, into the most remote and inaccessible parts of the park. On August 22nd, he was documenting specimens in a rugged, geologically complex area known as the Granite Maze, a labyrinth of colossal rock formations and deep, hidden fissures several miles from the Griffin's Peak Trail. The area was notoriously difficult to navigate and rarely visited even by the most experienced park rangers. While rappelling down a sheer rock face to get a closer look at a unique lichen colony, Thorne noticed something unnatural, a faint, almost imperceptible plume of heat shimmering from a narrow, horizontal crack in the rock about 30 feet below him, partially obscured by a curtain of overgrown mountain ivy. His scientific curiosity piqued. He adjusted his ropes and lowered himself towards the fissure. As he drew closer, he realized the heat was venting from a deliberate opening, and he could hear a low, mechanical hum. Pushing aside the thick vegetation, he found not a natural cave, but a heavy, insulated steel plate, painted and textured to blend almost perfectly with the surrounding granite. It was fitted with a small, camouflaged ventilation fan. It was a door. Believing he had stumbled upon an illegal mining operation or a poacher's hideout, he documented the location with his GPS, took several photographs, and immediately began the long hike back to civilization to report his finding to the park authorities. He had no idea he had just found the key to a mystery that had haunted the state for 3 years. The scene that confronted Sheriff Evans and a hand-picked team of tactical officers 2 days later was one of chilling, clinical horror. Following Dr. Thorne's coordinates, they located the camouflaged steel door. It was unlocked. After a specialized unit confirmed the air inside was safe, they breached the entrance and descended a narrow, steep staircase carved directly into the rock. The stairs opened into a large, artificially expanded cavern, lit by stark, battery-powered LED strips. The air was cool, dry, and carried the sterile scent of antiseptic. The space was divided into 3 distinct areas. The first was a combination workshop and laboratory, meticulously organized. Tools hung on a pegboard, beakers and vials were arranged on shelves, and a large table was covered with electronic components and wiring diagrams. The second area was a small living space with a cot, a camping stove, and shelves stacked with preserved food and books on geology, engineering, and philosophy. It was the third area, however, that caused the seasoned officers to stop dead in their tracks. Separated from the main chamber by a wall of chain-link fencing, like an animal enclosure, were 3 small, bare cells. In each cell, a woman was lying on a simple mattress on the floor. They were gaunt, their skin unnaturally pale from the lack of sunlight, their hair long and matted. They were alive. They were the Vance sisters. Each woman was attached by a single, thin chain from a locked cuff on her ankle to a bolt in the rock wall. The chains were long enough to allow them to reach a small toilet and a water dispenser, but no further. They were not emaciated to the point of starvation, but they were severely malnourished. They were conscious, their eyes open, but their expressions were eerily vacant, showing no surprise or fear at the sudden appearance of armed officers. When a female medic entered the enclosure and knelt beside the closest woman, Alara, and asked if she was okay, the response was quiet, calm, and utterly surreal. Alara looked at the medic, then at her sisters, and said in a soft, toneless voice, "It is feeding time. He will be back soon." The discovery of the Vance sisters, alive after 3 years of captivity, sent a shockwave through the state and instantly reignited the dormant investigation. The news, initially held back to protect the integrity of the operation, exploded across national media outlets. The narrative of a tragic wilderness accident or a voluntary disappearance was shattered, replaced by a far more sinister reality, a long-term abduction. The remote, hidden cavern became a major crime scene, cordoned off and meticulously processed by state and federal forensic teams. The reaction from the public was a mixture of profound shock, relief that the sisters were alive, and a morbid fascination with the details of their ordeal. For Eleanor Vance, the news was a cataclysmic event, a miracle wrapped in a nightmare. The phone call from Sheriff Evans, informing her that her daughters had been found alive, was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy that was immediately tempered by the horrifying context of their discovery. She was flown to the specialized medical facility where her daughters had been taken, but the reunion was not the tearful, cinematic embrace she had imagined for 3 long years. Her daughters were physically present but psychologically distant, their spirits encased in a protective shell of detached calm that was more unsettling than any outburst of grief would have been. The discovery raised 1,000 new questions. Who had done this? Why? And how had he kept them hidden, just a few miles from where hundreds of searchers had combed the forest for over 1,000 days? The mystery had not been solved. It had merely entered a new, more terrifying chapter. The case was immediately reclassified from a missing persons investigation to one of kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment, triggering the formation of a multi-agency task force led by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, working in conjunction with Sheriff Evans's department. The focus of the new investigation was singular: to identify and apprehend the man the sisters referred to only as the Keeper, the hidden cavern, which the perpetrator had clearly used as both a prison and a home, was a treasure trove of evidence, a self-contained world built by a meticulous and patient predator. The primary goal of the task force was to build a profile of this individual before he could disappear completely. The initial investigative thrust centered on the sisters themselves, who were now the sole witnesses to their long ordeal. However, their psychological state required a delicate and specialized approach. They were not typical trauma victims. Their responses were muted, their memories delivered in a flat, observational tone, as if they were describing events that had happened to someone else. This clinical detachment, a psychological survival mechanism developed over 3 years of captivity, made gathering information a slow and painstaking process. A team of FBI behavioral analysts and trauma counselors was assigned to work with them, not just to extract information, but to begin the monumental task of guiding them back to the world. The investigation had moved from the vast, indifferent wilderness to the intricate, scarred landscape of the human mind. The testimony of the Vance sisters, pieced together over weeks of careful, non-confrontational interviews, painted a harrowing portrait of their abduction and captivity. Their account began on the morning of their second day on the trail. As they were packing up their first campsite, a man emerged from the trees. He was unassuming, dressed in the practical gear of a seasoned hiker, and carried a geological hammer. He identified himself as a fellow hiker and amateur geologist and engaged Alara in a knowledgeable conversation about the local rock formations. He was calm, articulate, and disarming. He offered them a shortcut to a viewpoint not on their map, a place he promised had a spectacular view. Trusting his apparent expertise and friendly demeanor, they agreed. He led them off the main trail, through a series of increasingly dense woods and confusing game trails. It was during this shortcut that he made his move. At a pre-selected spot, a narrow passage between 2 large boulders, he suddenly and efficiently incapacitated them using a taser. The attack was swift, silent, and executed with shocking precision. He bound their hands and feet, gagged them, and then, one by one, carried them to the hidden entrance of the cavern. Their testimony provided the first clear description of their captor. A white male, likely in his late 50s, with graying hair, a wiry build, and startlingly cold, analytical blue eyes. They said he rarely spoke, and when he did, his tone was always that of a detached observer or a scientist. He never raised his voice, never displayed anger or any discernible emotion. He referred to his actions not as a crime, but as an experiment or a long-term observational study. He fed them a monotonous but nutritionally calculated diet of rice, beans, and vitamin supplements. He provided them with books, philosophy, classic literature, scientific texts, and would occasionally engage them in detached discussions about what they had read. He monitored their physical health with a clinical precision, taking blood pressure readings and recording their weight. This methodical, emotionless cruelty was, in many ways, more terrifying than overt brutality. He was not a monster of rage, but a monster of cold, chilling reason. While the sisters' testimony provided the what, the forensic analysis of the cavern provided the how, and, ultimately, the who. The FBI's forensic laboratory at Quantico took charge of the evidence, and their findings began to construct a detailed mosaic of the suspect. The custom-made ankle cuffs and the locking mechanisms were found to be of a highly specific design, not commercially available. Analysis of the metal and welding techniques suggested they were fabricated by a skilled machinist with access to specialized tools. The chain-link fencing used for the enclosure was a heavy-gauge industrial type, not something readily available at a local hardware store. The most significant discovery was a series of notebooks found in the laboratory section of the cavern. They were filled with thousands of pages of meticulous, handwritten notes, all in the same neat, disciplined script. The entries chronicled the sisters' captivity in excruciating detail. The writer recorded their daily food intake, their weight fluctuations, their sleep patterns, and summaries of their conversations. He logged their psychological states with detached, pseudoscientific jargon, noting periods of resistance, lethargy, and acclimatization. The notebooks were a chilling window into the perpetrator's mindset. He viewed the Vance sisters not as human beings, but as specimens in a private, long-term experiment on human endurance and adaptation. Furthermore, dust and soil samples collected from the cavern floor contained trace amounts of a rare mineral, wollastonite, which was known to be present in only a few specific geological locations in the state. One of those locations was an abandoned industrial quarry that had ceased operations in the late 1990s. Finally, a partial boot print, left in a patch of spilled plaster of Paris near the workshop, was matched to a specific brand of high-end work boot favored by industrial surveyors and engineers. The forensic evidence provided the crucial pieces needed to bridge the gap from a vague description to a specific identity. The task force began cross-referencing the disparate clues. They searched for individuals with a background in both machining and geology who had a connection to the Oakhaven National Forest. The mention of the abandoned wollastonite quarry proved to be the linchpin. A search of old employment records for the quarry revealed a list of former employees. On that list was a name, Silas Kane. A background check on Kane revealed a profile that fit the emerging picture of the suspect with startling accuracy. He was 58 years old, a former geological surveyor for the quarry company, and a skilled amateur machinist. He had no significant criminal history, save for a minor trespassing charge a decade earlier when he was found camping without a permit deep within the national forest. Critically, property records showed he had purchased a small, remote parcel of land bordering the Oakhaven Forest in the early 2000s, not far from the Granite Maze. A check of his purchasing history, using credit card records, revealed purchases of large quantities of industrial-grade chain-link fencing, bulk bags of rice and beans, and, most damningly, the exact brand of work boot that matched the print from the cavern. He was a recluse, a ghost with almost no social or digital footprint. He had no family, no listed phone number, and no social media presence. He was a man who had deliberately and successfully lived off the grid. The task force now had a name, a face from an old driver's license photo, and a location for his primary residence. The hunt for the keeper was about to end. The suspect, Silas Kane, had been identified. The apprehension of Silas Kane was planned with the precision of a military operation. Surveillance teams were covertly deployed to the area around his remote property, a small, rustic cabin surrounded by dense woods. For 3 days, they observed him, confirming his identity and routines. He appeared to be completely unaware that he was being watched, calmly going about his daily tasks of chopping wood and maintaining his property. He was a creature of habit, his movements predictable and efficient. The decision was made to execute the arrest at dawn on the 4th day, August 29th, to minimize the risk of a prolonged chase through the wilderness he knew so intimately. A federal tactical team, supported by Sheriff Evans and his deputies, established a silent perimeter around the cabin during the pre-dawn hours. The plan was to use a surprise assault to overwhelm him before he could access any weapons or attempt to flee. At 05:30 hours, as the first light of day began to filter through the trees, the team moved in. The breach was explosive and swift. Using a battering ram on the cabin's reinforced door, the officers flooded the small interior, their shouts of "FBI, get down," shattering the morning stillness. Kane was asleep on his cot. He awoke not with a start of panic, but with a slow, deliberate calm. As multiple agents trained their weapons on him, he simply sat up, swung his legs over the side of the bed, and placed his hands on his head. He showed no fear, no surprise, no resistance. His expression was one of mild annoyance, as if he were being inconvenienced by a minor bureaucratic interruption. As he was being cuffed, he looked directly at Sheriff Evans, who was standing in the doorway, and spoke his first words since being discovered. "The observational period was not yet complete," he said, his voice a flat, emotionless monotone. "Your interference has corrupted the data." During his interrogation at a secure federal facility, Silas Kane confessed to the abduction and imprisonment of the Vance sisters. The confession was not a product of guilt or remorse, but of a chillingly detached intellectual pride. He spoke for hours, without a lawyer, laying out the entire operation as if he were presenting a scientific paper at a symposium. He revealed that he had been planning his project for over a decade, searching for the perfect location and, more importantly, the perfect subjects. He chose the Vance sisters after observing them on a previous hike a year before their abduction. He was impressed by their physical fitness, their wilderness skills, and their strong familial bond. To him, they represented an ideal control group, genetically similar subjects who were already adapted to challenging environments. His motive, as he explained it, was a twisted form of philosophical and scientific inquiry. He had become obsessed with what he called the de-evolution of modern humanity. He believed that society, with its comforts and technologies, had made people weak and disconnected from their essential survival instincts. He wanted to study how resilient, capable individuals would adapt when stripped of all modern artifice and placed in a controlled, isolated environment. He did not see his actions as cruel. He saw them as a necessary methodology for his research. Pain, fear, deprivation, he stated during the interrogation, his voice devoid of any inflection. These are not punishments. They are merely variables. They are data points that allow one to measure the elasticity of the human psyche. He expressed frustration that his study had been interrupted, claiming that he was on the verge of Phase 2, which would have involved introducing new, controlled stressors to observe their problem-solving capabilities under duress. There was no apology, no flicker of empathy. In his mind, Alara, Lyra, and Kasha Vance were not victims. They were specimens. The trial of Silas Kane began in the spring of the following year and was one of the most closely watched legal proceedings in the state's history. The prosecution, led by a team of federal attorneys, built an insurmountable case. The physical evidence recovered from the cavern, the notebooks, the tools, the forensic traces, was overwhelming. Kane's own detailed confession provided a complete narrative of the crime, articulated from the perpetrator's own mouth. But the most powerful moments of the trial came from the testimony of the Vance sisters. One by one, Alara, Lyra, and Kasha took the stand. Their recovery had been a slow and arduous process, but they faced their captor in the courtroom with a quiet, unshakable dignity. Speaking in clear, steady voices, they recounted the details of their abduction and their 1,064 days in captivity. They described the cold, clinical routine, the psychological manipulation, and the complete and utter isolation. They did not weep or break down. Their testimony was delivered with the same observational precision their captor had used in his notebooks, a devastatingly effective way of conveying the profound dehumanization they had endured. Throughout their testimony, Silas Kane sat at the defense table, showing no emotion. He watched them as if they were still subjects in his experiment, occasionally taking notes on a legal pad. He had pled not guilty, not because he denied the facts, but on the grounds that his actions were not criminal but were in the service of a higher scientific purpose, an argument the court summarily rejected. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury took less than 2 hours to deliberate. They returned a verdict of guilty on all counts, including 3 counts of kidnapping and 3 counts of false imprisonment. At his sentencing hearing, Silas Kane was given the opportunity to address the court. He stood, adjusted his glasses, and delivered a short, rambling statement about the philosophical importance of his work, expressing regret only that his data would forever remain incomplete. He showed no remorse, offered no apology to the women whose lives he had stolen and irrevocably altered. The judge, in his sentencing remarks, called Kane's actions an act of profound and monstrous arrogance, a crime born not of passion or greed, but of a chilling intellectual depravity that defies comprehension. Silas Kane was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, one for each of the women he had imprisoned. He received the sentence with the same detached calm he had displayed throughout the entire process, a slight nod as if acknowledging a predictable outcome. As he was led from the courtroom, he made no eye contact with the Vance sisters or their mother. He simply walked away, a man forever encased in the prison of his own cold, remorseless mind. The legal chapter of the ordeal was finally closed. Justice, in its formal and procedural sense, had been served. But for the Vance sisters, the journey was far from over. The aftermath of the trial marked the beginning of a new, quieter, but no less challenging phase for the Vance family. The physical recovery of Alara, Lyra, and Kasha was relatively swift. Under proper medical care and nutrition, their bodies began to heal from the years of deprivation. It was the psychological recovery that proved to be a long and winding road. The clinical detachment that had served as a shield during their captivity was a difficult armor to shed. They worked extensively with trauma specialists, both individually and as a group, slowly and painstakingly rebuilding the emotional connections to the world and to each other that their captor had tried to sever. Their shared ordeal had forged a bond between them that was even deeper than before, a silent understanding that no one outside their trio could ever fully grasp. They found solace not in forgetting, but in reclaiming the very thing that had led them into danger, their love for the wilderness. Guided by therapists and park rangers, they began taking short, controlled hikes, reintroducing themselves to the natural world not as a place of trauma, but as a source of healing and resilience. It was an act of profound courage, a refusal to let Kane's actions permanently poison their passion. The legacy of the Vance sisters' case extended far beyond their personal recovery. It prompted a sweeping review of how law enforcement and search and rescue agencies handle missing persons cases in vast wilderness areas. The discovery of Kane's hidden cavern, located so relatively close to the initial search area, was a humbling lesson in the limitations of traditional search methods. In response, the state implemented new protocols, incorporating the use of advanced ground-penetrating radar and thermal imaging drones in searches involving complex geological terrain. A new piece of legislation, informally dubbed the Vance Act, was passed, providing additional funding and interagency training for long-term missing persons task forces. Eleanor Vance, once a grieving mother pleading for help, became a formidable advocate for the families of other missing people. She co-founded a nonprofit organization that provides financial grants for private investigations and emotional support for families navigating the agonizing limbo of a cold case. Her tireless work ensured that the lessons learned from her daughter's ordeal would be used to help others, creating a legacy of hope and systemic change from an event of unimaginable darkness. In the years that followed, the Vance sisters chose to live quiet lives, away from the media spotlight that had once consumed them. Alara returned to her work as a geologist, finding comfort in the long, silent timelines of the Earth. Lyra dedicated herself to conservation work within the Oakhaven National Forest, working to protect the very wilderness that had been the backdrop to her trauma. Kasia, after a long period of healing, eventually returned to teaching, her experience lending her a profound empathy for the quiet struggles of her young students. They never gave a major television interview or wrote a book about their experience. Their story was their own, and they chose to process it in private, supported by their family and a small circle of trusted friends. Their survival was a testament not just to their physical fortitude, but to the incredible resilience of the human spirit. They had been subjected to an experiment designed to observe their breaking points, but they had not broken. They had endured. They had survived. They had healed. The story of the Vance sisters serves as a stark and chilling reminder of the hidden realities that can exist just beneath the surface of our ordinary world. It underscores the terrifying truth that the greatest dangers often do not come from the overt chaos of violence, but from the quiet, methodical application of a cold and detached ideology. Silas Kane was not a creature of impulse. He was a predator of intellect, his cruelty cloaked in the language of science and philosophy. His crime was a profound violation, not just of the law, but of the very essence of human empathy. Yet, in the face of this calculated dehumanization, the resilience of Alara, Lyra, and Kasia Vance stands as a powerful counter-narrative. They survived not by becoming like their captor, but by preserving the core of their humanity in the face of absolute inhumanity. Their journey from the darkness of that hidden cavern back into the light is a testament to the enduring power of hope, the unbreakable strength of familial bonds, and the quiet, stubborn refusal of the human spirit to be reduced to a mere data point. It is a story of survival in its most profound sense, a quiet victory over a darkness that few could ever imagine.